1812 had been a disastrous year for Napoleon. His invasion of Russia had led to the almost total destruction.
Napoleon Bonaparte, one of history's most brilliant military commanders.
Want to hear a name that screams power, ambition, and conquest? Napoleon Bonaparte, former emperor of the French.
1792. Europe is plunged into conflict by revolution in France.
The Little Corporal is known for taking over much of Europe, but did you know there's an entire treasure of bizarre and untold facts beneath his legendary conquests? From being absolutely terrified of cats to his body parts going on a world tour, here are 32 weird truths about Napoleon that will leave you shocked. Number 1. Aerophobia. Did you know there was a time when Napoleon was probably the most feared man on the planet? We're talking about a man set out with just one goal in mind: world domination. But wait a second, hold up. The mighty emperor has aerophobia? Or, simply put, an irrational fear of cats? That's absurd. There are several historical accounts that indicate Napoleon was absolutely terrified of cats and avoided them at all costs. He thought they were linked to witchcraft and curses, and would much rather face a firing squad than be left alone with a cat.
Napoleon, not satisfied with his position in the army, decided that instead he would return to Corsica.
I guess felines were his Achilles heel. Number 2, British propaganda. Look, we all know Napoleon wasn't the tallest guy around, but he wasn't the shortest by any standards either. For that time and age, his height was perfectly average as he stood tall at about 5'6" or 5'7". The real confusion arose because of the French measurement system and how his height recorded in the French feet seemed much shorter. The British capitalized on this, mocking him as the Little Corporal. It also led to the term Napoleon complex, often used to describe aggressive behavior in short men. But yeah, Napoleon wasn't exactly short or anything. It was just some weird British propaganda to belittle his power. Number 3, an unexpected enemy. Napoleon was brutal on the battlefield. He was fearless and created chaos everywhere he went. I mean, let's be real here.
Napoleon was thrilled with the expedition, which he had worked tirelessly to promote and organize. It was a chance to achieve new glory and to follow in the footsteps of his heroes, Julius Caesar and Alexander the Great.
You have to be crazy to conquer more than half of Europe. But did you know Napoleon actually faced an unexpected enemy that forced him to retreat once? A horde of rabbits. You heard that right. During a hunting ceremony, his men released hundreds of rabbits, but instead of scattering in different directions, the horde ended up charging at Napoleon. This was because the rabbits were tamed and used to humans feeding them. Anyway, his men had to escort him back to the carriages as he almost got trampled by hundreds of cute bunnies. Number 4, an avid writer. Did you know the Little Corporal actually gave writing a shot before his military glory? Seems hard to believe, right? Well, it's true. The French conqueror tried his hand at writing a romance novel titled Clisson et Eugénie. Think of it as a semi-autobiography describing his own heartbreak after a failed relationship. The similarities are uncanny, as the novel describes a war hero who falls deeply in love, only to be betrayed, leading to heartbreak. I mean, I wouldn't exactly call this a weird fact, since Napoleon was also a human who had a softer side. But his literary prowess didn't exactly help him rise to fame, as his ambitions were only discovered afterward. Number 5, truth or another telltale. There's not a lot of evidence that suggests whether this story is true, but some historians claim Napoleon ordered his men to damage the Sphinx. It's a tale from his Egyptian campaigns, as several accounts indicate his men used the Sphinx as target practice and ended up blowing off the nose. But the majority of historical evidence suggests that the Sphinx was already damaged way before Napoleon ever stepped foot in Egypt. I'm talking centuries before. So whether this story is true or not still remains a mystery, and honestly, it could just be something to add more flair to his already hyped up legacy. It's still super interesting. It's like he literally left a mark in history. Number 6, strange obsession. You'd imagine Napoleon would be obsessed with gold, fortresses, or women, but nope. My guy was obsessed with pineapple. Yep. The spiky fruit aroused like nothing else, and that's mainly because it was considered as a status symbol in Europe. For starters, it was super rare and expensive, meaning only the elite could afford it. And since Napoleon pretty much had the entire world in his hand, he insisted it be included in every single meal. There's even word of how he tried growing it in his own backyard, but ended up failing miserably since France's climate wasn't exactly ideal. Number 7, expired poison. I think we've all seen those movies with the spy agent hiding a cyanide capsule in their mouth. Did you know Napoleon also did something similar, but instead of hiding cyanide in his mouth, he had some poison stored in a necklace? Oh, and did you know he even tried to take it once? It happened during his exile on Elba. Napoleon thought it was the end, and fearing disgrace, he decided to take it, only to realize how it had expired. Word is, the little conqueror went through extreme stomach pain and vomiting, and it really makes you wonder, for a man who planned his campaigns down to the finest detail, it's kind of ironic how he failed to check the expiration date on his exit plan. Number 8, the Innovator. Did you know? Napoleon had an army of 600,000 men. Just imagine the logistics and the burden of feeding such a large army. History suggests that he'd lose hundreds and sometimes even thousands of men to starvation. And that led to perhaps one of the most significant innovations of his life. Canned food, ladies and gentlemen. We owe it to Napoleon. Well, we owe it to Nicholas Appert to be precise, but the entire competition was actually organized by the conqueror. He offered a reward to anyone who'd come up with the best method to preserve food, all so that he could feed his massive army during his military conquests. I mean, it's definitely kind of strange how we got canned food from a mad conqueror who couldn't deal with a hungry army. Number 9, almost an American officer. Isn't it strange how history seems so major, but when you think about it, it's all just a web of small decisions. What does that mean? Well, before his rise to fame in France, Napoleon actually considered joining the British or American military. Just imagine how different history might have been if he had gone through with it. Instead of commanding the French Empire, the little corporal may have led troops during the American Revolutionary War, or it's possible he might have served under King George III. I mean, Napoleon as an American or a British soldier. It's just so hard to fathom. But to think how that could have been a reality if Napoleon had continued seeking opportunities outside of France. Number 10, wild sibling. There's no denying Napoleon was a disciplined man. Sure, everyone has a vice, and things tend to get wild every now and then. But you really have to be something else to conquer nearly all of Europe. Not if you're a sibling of his, though. Rumor has it, Napoleon's sister, Napoleon Bonaparte, was a wild party animal, creating chaos everywhere she went. She was known for throwing some of the wildest, most extravagant parties ever. There's even a story of how she posed nude for famous sculptor Antonio Canova, much to Napoleon's dismay. But despite all of this, history remembers him as a loving brother who did nothing but defend his sister's wild behavior. I guess we all need a bro like Napo. Number 11, hopeless romantic. Alright, so we know Napoleon had a soft side. The ruthless conqueror was literally writing romance novels before going nuts on the battlefield. But here's another weird secret about the former emperor. Did you know he was obsessed with his first wife? Yep. Napoleon was down bad for Josephine. I really don't want to say this, but he might just be the first dude in history to simp. And of course, there's nothing wrong with loving your wife, but carrying locks of your wife's hair to war. Now, that's a bit weird. Even after their divorce, Napoleon always had her hair with him, but history does remember him as a hopeless romantic deeply attached to his wife. There's even accounts of him visiting her tomb after her death. Number 12, out-of-this-world ambition. We all know he was an ambitious guy. I mean, why else would he want to take over the world? But his ambition knew no bounds, as there's stories of him talking about wanting to take over the moon. You heard that right? There was a time when the French conqueror grew increasingly fond of science and astronomy, and that's when he started talking about wanting to plant a French flag on the moon. I appreciate the limitless imagination. What was he even thinking? This was what, the 17th or 18th century, and our guy here is talking about wanting to rule the moon. I bet he would have given Elon Musk a real tough time had he been born in this century. Number 13, control freak. Was Napoleon a control freak? For a man of his stature, authority meant a lot to him, and that often led to Napoleon exercising his power, even in the most trivial of matters, like banning women from certain dresses. Napoleon once banned women from wearing dresses with excessive plunging necklines, and you know what's ironic about that? It never stopped his own court from indulging in extravagance. Even his mistress, Marie Walewska, was often seen in daring attire, challenging Napoleon's outrageous rules. You can't have it all, even if you're a legendary conqueror. Number 14, terrible gambling. Napoleon loved gambling. He loved it to the point that whenever he wasn't out on the battlefield, you'd find him at the gambling table. And you'd expect him to be quite good at it as well, considering how he was such a brilliant strategist. But I think by now, you've realized that Napoleon had his own set of weaknesses, and one of them was losing large sums of money. The little corporal was a terrible gambler. In fact, he was so bad that his wife Josephine often had to cover his debts. There was a time when his advisors had to come up with elaborate plans to limit his access to the table. I guess even the greatest tacticians have their blind spot. Number 15, a secret tunnel. I'm going to keep it 100 with you. Napoleon had some weird ideas, And I think by now, we've also established the fact that aside from his military achievements, he was a normal dude with his demon. But with great power comes foolish ideas. No, I mean it. Sometimes people get so caught up in their little bubble that they come up with some of the most absurd things ever. Like how Napoleon wanted to connect England to France by a tunnel under the English Channel. And trust me, in a way, he sort of envisioned the Eurotunnel, but back then this idea was simply impossible. There was just no way to build a tunnel under the English Channel back then. But the fact that he dedicated a huge amount of resources to build this tunnel sort of showed how foolish he could be at times. And again, I'm not calling out the actual idea because his vision is ultimately a precursor to the Eurotunnel today. Number 16, love for tight pants. Josephine, gambling, and war. These are some of the things Napoleon deeply admired. Oh wait, how can I forget the tight pant? There's just no other way to put this. Napoleon not only envisioned the Eurotunnel, but he may have invented skinny jeans as well. Yep. His pants were custom, tailored perfectly to highlight his leg. Believe it or not, even military uniforms, including jackets and shoes, were tailored as Napoleon loved fashion. I wouldn't even say it was love, since he was absolutely obsessed with tight pants. And what's funny is, his enemies mocked him for it as well. Number 17, soft spot for puppies. Napoleon might have hated cats, but he adored dogs. It wouldn't be wrong to say he had a soft spot. It's rumored that the little corporal would surround himself with multiple puppies during stressful time. That's smart. He even gifted Josephine a special pug named Fortune. And the funny thing about that is, it was Napoleon who grew more fond and attached with the pug. But who would have ever thought? For a guy who loved the battlefield, having a soft spot for puppies sure is cute and weird. Number 18, strange rituals. One thing to keep in mind here is that all of this happened nearly 300 years back. And to say people had strange rituals in that era would be an understatement. Forget the common folk. Even royalty did some of the strangest things ever. Like Napoleon, for example. He drank perfume and cologne. The French emperor believed perfume could cure certain ailment and would mix it with water and gulp it down. He also used to sniff certain scents right before battle, as he believed they enhanced his focus. I mean, the latter, still acceptable. Certain scents can make you feel good and confident, but throwing perfume or cologne down like it's a shot? Now, that's a bit absurd. Number 19, a game of chess. I don't want to undermine Napoleon's ruthlessness by telling you all of these weird things, because at the end of the day, he was a man who loved violence and control. The little corporal was willing to go to any lengths to secure victory. Believe it or not, Europe wasn't a land of different cultures and people for him. It was just a big old chessboard. There he was, secure in his fortress, redrawing the borders of Europe like it was a personal chessboard. His hunger for power led him to placing his siblings as kings, with his brothers ruling over Spain, Naples, and Westphalia. His sister also became a duchess thanks to Napoleon's royal placement, but despite playing real-life Game of Thrones, most of this just backfired. And that's mainly because his siblings didn't share the same ambition as him, and severely lacked leadership skills. I wonder how things might have been if his siblings were the same as him. We might have been living in a Napoleonic world. Number 20, an intellect. Napoleon was quite an intellect, or should I say, lyrical genius. His might on the battlefield was unquestionable, but his game on paper? Straight fire, folks. When Napoleon wrote, the world froze. At least for his lover, that is. Remember when I told you how the French conqueror was down bad for Josephine? Well, you could see a lot of that obsession in the letters he wrote. In one letter, Napoleon wrote, "Without you, the world is a desert in which I am lost." Damn, Napoleon! I didn't know you wrote straight-up bars. But yeah, you can actually feel the intensity he had for Josephine in some of his letters. Believe it or not, there's even a story of how he chastised Josephine for not replying fast enough. My man probably thought he's getting ghosted. Number 21, another invention. We know Napoleon laid the foundation to a lot of modern inventions. He might have not done any practical work, but he definitely envisioned or conceived a lot of them. But here's something he did invent: street numbers. I'm not making this up. Napoleon actually invented street numbers. He was of the idea that all buildings in a street should be numbered logically from start to finish. I'm guessing his knack for order and structure came because of his strategic mindset. Just as he was organized, prepared, and orderly on the battlefield, he preferred his empire to be the same. Number 22, paranoia or smart. Did you know Napoleon actually had an entire network of spies stationed all over Europe? Like, come on. There's a reason why this guy was at the brink of taking over Europe. He was hungry for intel. His agents would give him regular intel intel on his enemies and even some of his own office. Napoleon actually uncovered a lot of moles in his own empire that were actively working to take him down. But was this cleverness or just paranoia? Because I get the part, but spying on your enemies, but you have a problem when you're spying on your allies. Well, it actually ended up costing him a lot of good relations with allied forces, all because his hunger for information got the better of him. I guess your spies sometimes can't even save you from your own mistrust. Number 23, mummies from Egypt. Here's another one of Napoleon's shenanigans from his Egypt campaign. Not only is he held responsible for shooting off the Sphinx's nose, but he also ordered his troops to bring back a lot of artifacts, including mummy. Napoleon ended up bringing mummies back from Egypt, and if I'm being honest, this had a huge influence on Western culture. But the interesting bit about all this is how Napoleon's downfall started after he brought over these mummies. Whether you believe in curses or not is a different story, but the idea of an emperor dabbling with mummies is crazy. Number 24, a superstitious man. Even though Napoleon was obsessed with science, he was an extremely superstitious man. He relied heavily on fortune tellers who'd often just share positive things, or at least things he wanted to hear, only to remain safe. He was so deep into it that he'd avoid wearing certain colors, and even carried charms into battle. One of his most prized possessions was a medallion with an Egyptian symbol. The little conqueror believed that without this medallion, he wouldn't be successful on the battlefield. Strange how such a brilliant tactician and rational thinker ended up believing in some of the strangest things ever. Number 25, charisma overloaded. Remember when I mentioned Napoleon was once exiled to Elba? Well, the 100 Days comeback on 8th of July, 1815 was when Napoleon escaped from exile and returned to France. It was a grand parade as Napoleon marched back, but it turned out a battalion was present to arrest him on the spot. But instead of resisting or making a run for it, Napoleon surrendered right there and then, and dared them to shoot him. The battalion eventually dropped their weapons and cheered him on as he made his legendary return to Paris. It's really an incident for the history book. I mean, just imagine an entire battalion waiting to take you in. And there stands Napoleon, unarmed, asking them to shoot if they dare. That's super badass. Number 26, signature fragrance. Napoleon didn't just drink his favorite perfume. No, sir. He loathed himself in them every single day, and even had his very own signature fragrance. It was called Eau de Cologne Impériale, a fashion statement in Old France, wildly popular among the... Believe it or not, Napoleon would go through several bottles in a single month, as he was always seen using it. He would even break in the midst of war to spray himself down with his iconic scent. Talk about personal branding. There's a reason why he's so legendary to this day. I mean, I guess smelling like an emperor is equally important as being Number 27, an odd status symbol. I think by now it's no secret that Napoleon was obsessed with hygiene. Whether it involved spraying himself down with perfume or even drinking some, you'd expect him to be fresh. But at a time when people hardly knew anything about dental hygiene, did you know the French emperor had an ivory-handled toothbrush? And it wasn't just an ordinary toothbrush or anything. It was actually a status symbol back then, displaying his refined taste and dedicated to personal care. But he didn't do it for the gram or anything. He even took it to his war campaign, so I'm guessing the guy was just a paranoid germaphobe. Number 28, plain and simple. For a man of his grandeur, Napoleon sure loved a simple cuisine. I'm guessing that came from his soldier mentality. They usually eat for functionality and not taste. And even though the little corporal lived a lifestyle like no other, he never had a thing for gourmet food. The most he'd eat was chicken, onions, and potatoes. That's it. He'd eat that every single day. It was so repetitive that his chefs would get annoyed since there was no room for them to be creative. And it makes sense as well. What's the point of hiring chefs when you're going to eat the same exact thing every single day? And this fact might not exactly be weird, but it's still a bit hard to imagine how the Emperor of France, a man with exotic and luxurious taste, ate nothing but 3 things. Number 29, going incognito. Napoleon stood out. It's as simple as that. He wasn't exactly short, but an average height, tight jeans, and a signature scent isn't exactly going to help him blend in. That too during a time when the majority of these things were a luxury. But that doesn't mean Napoleon didn't desire to go unnoticed at times. There are stories of how he'd dress up like a low-ranking soldier and walk the streets of France, watching the common folk live their lives. There's even mentions of him striking conversations to random people about himself to understand what people think of him. Sounds like a medieval episode of Undercover Boss to me. Number 30, weird sleeping schedule. In light of what I just said about Napoleon being an undercover boss, I think I should tell you that he wasn't exactly the best boss apart from that either. And I think a lot of it had to do with his terrible sleep schedule. Like most of the things in his life, Napoleon had his own theories about sleep. In fact, he believed that sleeping was a waste of time and would boast about functioning on just 3 3 or 4 hours of sleep. It got to the point when he started ordering his generals to do the same, and let's just say they weren't as excited. Napoleon didn't even sleep during his military campaigns and would just take a strategic nap between a battle to recharge. Just think about that for a second. A strategic nap in the middle of a war. Number 31, strong hat game. Hat game? Strong. Napoleon wasn't just the Emperor of France. He was also the Emperor of fashion. His hat game was so strong that, unlike all the other officers, Napoleon wore his hat sideways, making him easily recognizable. Even in 100 men, the little conqueror was easily identifiable, all because of his hat. Now, I don't necessarily think that's a good thing, especially during war. Just look for a sideways hat, and you'll have the Emperor of France. Number 32, strangest world tour ever. I saved the absolute weirdest for the last. Did you know Napoleon's private part has been on a world tour? A doctor removed his private part after his autopsy, which has changed several hands since then, making appearances at museums, auctions, and even underneath someone's bed. Talk about legacy, though. He didn't take over all of Europe, but his private part took over the world and traveled way more than he ever could. That's weird and hilarious at the same time. Anyway, that's it for today's video, folks. So, what do you think? Did you know the conqueror of France would be so weird? And is there something strange I missed out? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more interesting videos in the future. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.